Lysander Spooner said it best in 1870. But whether the Constitution really be one thing or another, this much is certain, that it has either authorized such a government as we have had, or it is powerless to prevent it. In either case, it is unfit to exist. This single phrase captures the true resolution of this prompt. The US Constitution has become a meaningless document. Recent polls highlight the disconnect. 94% of Americans say the Constitution is important for protecting liberty, yet only 22% trust the federal government most of the time. That massive gap shows symbolic affection for the document as an idea, but not evidence it actually functions as a restraint. People love the symbol, while the reality, unchecked powers, remains unchanged. Mathematician Kurt Gödel discovered a logical loophole in the Constitution. No one quite knows what it actually was because he was consistently paranoid about saying it. But he says that the Constitution could have been legally transformed into a dictatorship through legal steps. If the supreme law permits its own suicide, how is it that as a meaningful restraint? The Commerce Clause, meant only for interstate trade, has been stretched far beyond enumerated powers. Gibbons versus Ogden preempted state laws under a broad commerce reading. McCulloch versus Maryland upheld implied powers for a national bank via necessary and proper. Wickard v. Filburn declared a farmer's homegrown wheat affects interstate commerce, justifying federal limits and private activity. Today, this clause authorizes vast regulations on healthcare, education, and more, rendering enumerated powers meaningless. The Bill of Rights fares no better. Through selective incorporation via the 14th Amendment, the court has applied some protections to states, like free speech in Getlow versus New York, or right to counsel versus Gideon versus Wainwright, but inconsistently. Others remain unincorporated or weakened. Third Amendment is rarely invoked. Second is under regulatory pressures constantly. Selective enforcement means the Bill of Rights only protects liberties when the court chooses to. Cases like Dred Scott versus Sanford use judicial power to protect slavery or deny citizenship. Slaughterhouse cases in 1873 gutted the 14th Amendment's privileges or immunity clauses limiting federal protections of rights. These show a pattern. The Constitution either authorizes expansions or is powerless to prevent them.
Does an expansion of the rules, like by extending the rules of what the Constitution is to fit terms of what you're doing, constitute the Constitution not working, or does that just mean that you're abusing the limits of it?
It would mean it's not working because it's meant to restrict the power of the state, and if the power is growing, then it's not. Then the self-enforcement or the Bill of Rights, or not the Bill of Rights, the checks and balances aren't working,
only
so
have
it
a
has
minute.
failed.
Okay, but the issue is if they're trying to work within the parameters of the Constitution within the rights, because you said that they're extending what these things mean within the Constitution, which means they're working within the parameters of the Constitution to extend what they can do. That is an issue, obviously, but that means that they're still using the parameters that the Constitution sets for their own power. They're just trying to abuse where that goes. That does not mean that the Constitution does not work. It just means that they're trying to find loopholes. That's like saying that regulations on businesses don't work because occasionally a business tries to find a way around them. That's not the same thing. They still are there. They're there for a reason and they do work. Clearly, they know that they have to follow them and that there is repercussions for not following them. That's why they're trying to find reasons to justify their way of kind of using loopholes within it. Would you disagree with that?
The issue, I see where you're going with this. The issue with that statement is what's if you can continuously reinterpret the Constitution, what's the point of the Constitution? If you can say this is if you can say this is constitutional via this interpretation, what's the point of having a constitution if you can constantly
I mean,
reinterpret it?
that would be saying that's like comparing that a lawyer who finds different interpretations of the law in order to defend their person, their client, is also there's no need for a law then because they find their way of bending what it means. I believe that the Constitution has been expanded and extended the powers for the government, has extended the use and range of what the Constitution actually allows them to do. However, I do not believe that the Constitution is some invalid document that we now completely ignore. If it was, then there would not be any fear or justifications being made by the actual administration to justify their actions within the Constitution. It is not a perfect document that will always hold everything that we consider to be unacceptable accountable. However, the purpose of the document is to make sure that no matter how far somebody tries to stretch it, there is an actual basis that they can then be held accountable to. That means that regardless of what currently is happening with the abuse of it, it has not lost its value until it is no longer a existing threat to the abuse of power currently happening. So whether the perception of it by the general population is that they believe it's an important document, but also that they don't believe the federal government is being held accountable while doing that, I think he said 20% or so believe that the federal government can be trusted to be held accountable or something by it, whatever. Even if that's the case, it's not about what the general public thinks will happen with the federal government. It's what the federal government themselves know that they cannot get away with. That is why when, like, for example, when police officers abuse your rights and they find ways to for arresting somebody for resisting arrest, something like that, the absurd things that they might use that are considered completely unconstitutional and not lawful at all, that is an abuse, right? That right there does not mean that the law does not matter, that it is not valuable, because the follow up to that is that you can then sue them for breaking the law, right? Does it mean that because they were able to do it in the first place, that that law no longer, that it's not a real document anymore? It's of no importance to anybody? Or does it mean that the reason that that law exists, the reason why the Constitution exists and limits their power, is so that in the interim, I guess is the right word, the follow up to what has happened, you can actually hold them accountable for their actions. That that is my point, and that's my time.
All right. 2 minutes is on the clock for you now, McGruff. Go ahead and cross-examine.
All right. Does the 10th Amendment state that powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution are reserved to the states or to the people?
Yes, it does.
Is the power of judicial review the authority of the Supreme Court to strike down acts of Congress or the President expressly granted to the Supreme Court anywhere in the text of the Constitution, or did the court first assert that power for itself in Marbury versus Madison in 1803?
Are you asking me constitutional questions for your? Yes, yes.
So since that case, so since 1803, has the Supreme Court ever repudiated or surrendered that self-asserted power of judicial review, or has it effectively gone unchallenged as a core function of the court for 223 years?
I actually don't know, but I'm gonna assume that the answer to that is yes. Though I would say that
No, it is
no,
never.
actually yes. No, because I
It's
was
never. It's
gonna.
never.
That's no, no. Go ahead. Go ahead. Continue. I want to see where this is going. Go ahead.
So, in other words, the Constitution has either failed to prevent the Supreme Court from claiming power not delegated to it, or to correct that expansion once it has already happened, allowing federal power to grow unchecked for more than 2 centuries. Is that fair?
Okay, but what? So what's your point? I'm
My
confused.
point
Are
is
you
that the
saying?
court. My point is that the Constitution is this rather the Supreme Court granted itself power. It was not explicitly granted within the Constitution, and would be not allowed with after the 10th Amendment was passed.
So you're saying that the Supreme Court is in defiance of the Constitution, and that itself makes the Constitution an invalid document. That's
It's
your
a
argument.
it's an
And it's been for
argument. Yes.
and the Constitution has been an invalid document for 2 centuries. That's your argument here.
Yes.
I feel like history completely refutes that statement, but I don't understand. So in the past 2 centuries, this is wait. When was the what was the year? This
1803.
is this first
1803.
1803. Okay. So since 1803, the Constitution See, I would think that you would argue this from maybe in a more recent time, maybe since the 1950s, since the president has declared war numerous times without congressional approval. That would
Oh,
be a
sure.
defiance of the
I have a bunch of
Constitution.
cases.
But my confusion here is that your addressing of this is the Supreme Court's overreaching power for the 10th Amendment. I I I mean, this is something that if anything, at this point, if it is that big of a difference to it, because our Constitution, let's be honest here, has only really been, in my opinion, of any real importance since 1865, since it was already denying the rights that was supposedly in the Bill of Rights to a large chunk of the population. So, I mean, from 1865 to the current day and age, I think that's the time that I'd really consider the Constitution to be what it. No, actually, not even then, even later than that. But my point being is that if that hadn't
The,
changed and they have not ratified the Constitution to give the Supreme Court that power since then, and they have had that, then there's likely something here that because I don't know the Constitution entirely, that is probably there that'll grant them that power in the first place. Now,
it's it's you could argue it's implied within the Constitution, the power of judicial review, but it is never explicitly enumerated within the Constitution. And after the passing of the 10th Amendment, so it would be about 12 years between the passing of the 10th Amendment and that SCOTUS case. There would, if that case has happened before 10th Amendment was passed, I could see the argument where the implied powers would work, but because it was passed after the 10th Amendment and the enumerated powers have to be explicitly enumerated to the federal government.
I'll
Yeah,
tell
I
you,
would say
I honestly expected this to be a debate about the current overreach of the administration that we're currently dealing with. I didn't expect this to be a question
no,
about the powers of the Supreme Court
I
dating back
no,
to.
I thought of that approach, but I thought that was too obvious.
Well, okay. Uh,
But
shit.
the same no, but the same token, yeah, you could have we could talk about the war powers and executive overreach from the Korean War onward. The declaration, no, there hasn't been a declaration of war since World War II. Yet
Yes,
Korea,
a
Vietnam, Iraq,
congressionally approved
Afghanistan.
declaration. Yes.
Yeah. Um, war power resolutions in 1973 tried to restrain power, but it has either been ignored or at most weakly enforced.
Mhm. Now, what I was going to say about this, and honestly, my whole point here that I was coming towards this with is every single constitutional, or every single overreach by the government that is in defiance of the Constitution will be met with some form of repercussions due to the fact that that is literally what the Constitution is for. Now, if those repercussions are not to what we see fit, that is not our decision. However, the purpose of the Constitution is definitely being served in the follow up to overstepping, or no, not the right word. Defiance of the Constitution, I guess the right word. I
I
say
just
that because currently the biggest fear right now, if you listen to, I believe, I can't remember which was this a senator, I believe, who was talking about if they lose the midterms that there will be a lot of officials likely going to jail. The point that he's saying that, the reason that he's nervous
is
in
that Rick
saying
Scott?
that,
No,
was that Rick Scott?
sounds like it sounds like something Rick Scott would say.
I
I
don't.
don't know for sure.
I feel like I'd
I
remember
don't know.
since I'm a Floridian if that was Rick Scott. But the
That's
reason I'm
fair.
saying
That's fair.
this is because there's a reason that they're worried about that. There's a reason that they have a fear of prosecution following up after the actions that they've made. Because if the Constitution was an actual useless document that nobody cared about, these people would not try to find a justification for their actions. Not to the public, not for a moral, because they don't care about how the public truly feels about their actions. It's a justification to avoid the legal ramifications of what they're doing. And you can see their fear about this currently. That is proof
So
enough that the Constitution has its
well,
purposes and serving its purpose.
so if we lived in a non-constitutional government, would they still want? Would they still not be trying to explain away their actions?
Absolutely not. They don't. Do you think Putin explains away his actions whenever he commits war, he might try to justify it to other nations, but to his own people, he has no reason to attempt to explain it because there's no possible case of prosecution by his own people. You think that Xi Jinping explains away his actions? Do you? I can't think of a single other country that's had an actual authoritarian like regime that has then done actions such as I mean, people love to talk about like Tiamat Square in China. I believe that was Mao Zedong,
Yeah,
right? I don't believe he went to the public and said, "Listen, this is the reason why I did it. Here's the legal grounds for how I did this. Please don't prosecute us." They didn't have to. You know why they have to justify these things here? Because they know that there is legal ramification for their actions here. That is the point. Now, the only difference in this is, I mean, not the only difference, but the only thing that you can truly point out that might affect how effective the Constitution is how effective the people who enforce the Constitution is afterwards. But that is that is nonetheless still
I
means
mean,
that the Constitution has its powers. It's the purpose
I
of it, the paper there that is to decide what you can
I
do to them afterwards.
I already showed that there has been at least one case where the Constitution wasn't enforced.
Mhm.
I already showed in 1803 the SCOTUS gave
The
itself more
const-
power,
I'm
and
sure
so
there's
no one
situations where the
enforced
law
that.
is also not enforced and nobody served a time sentence for committing a crime. Does that mean that the law no longer matters? I'm sure that there are situations where it is decided to not be enforced. However, that is again the purpose of a law is so that you can enforce it when you need to. That is like I mean the purpose is to enforce it all the time, but the fact that it's there and that it exists is so that you can still enforce it when it is necessary. They just if they never felt it was necessary or the opposition to if there was no true opposition to the Supreme Court's I guess overreach as you would call it, then there was never any prosecution for it. But that does not apply in this situation, especially because the general public is not happy with what is currently going on.
Is it so? Wait, so
What am-
only necessary. So is there a point where someone could break a law and it becomes unnecessary to punish them for their actions?
What do you
You said
sure, I
you
guess
said
if somebody sure, a situation where somebody breaks a law and it was unnecessary to punish them for their actions, I guess intoxicated walking around or something, nothing happened to somebody. Like it's illegal to be intoxicated in public, but if you saw somebody passed out on the sidewalk or something, I mean, you don't have to prosecute them. You don't have to arrest them. It's not that big of a deal. I mean, there are minor things that the government can commit that would not be that big of a deal to most people. There are numerous cases I could think of that were definitely overreached by the government that didn't face repercussion. I mean, we literally talked about like declarations of war that were not congressionally approved, that were not followed up on. But the fact is that even in
because
that
Americans
case,
don't give a shit.
okay,
Americans don't
and
give a
that's the point. The
yeah.
Constitution is supposed to be an agreement amongst all of us. And if the agreement here is that we don't give a shit, then why should
What
we?
what
Why
wait
then?
wait
What's the point there? It
what
still
what
serves its
agreement?
purpose. When we do give a shit, we can still enforce those rules, can't we?
When did I agree? When did I agree to it?
Okay, this buddy, this country is, as I will describe it, always is authoritarian. Okay, it's authoritarian of the
Mhm.
majority. Just because you don't agree with it doesn't mean that the majority doesn't. You know, and if we wanted to prosecute, for example, if we wanted to prosecute Bush after the war on terror, which I guess did get approval, but his illegal
Not really.
wars in other countries, however, if we wanted to prosecute him for those things, we absolutely could have. But instead, the decision that was made afterwards was to rebuild and come together, which I don't agree with. But I'm not the majority of the country now, am I? The Constitution is an agreement amongst all of us, which isn't it has to be a majority. Sorry, but that's how the country works.
I l- well, why? I guess I'm confused. Why does why does it have to be something we all?
Because it's a
Was
democracy.
it? Was it?
Because it's a democracy. The Constitution is literally the foundation for our democracy. The democracy is the majority's opinion, is kind of what rules. It's it's an authoritarianism by the majority. In this situation, currently with the overreach of the administration, the majority is not happy with it. That's why they fear prosecution. In the past, when Bush committed his acts, the majority was not happy with it. However, the majority preferred a peaceful solution instead of prosecution.
Okay,
Correct.
I would say that the Constitution should be able to stop those acts from happening in the first place If ICE can, why is ICE or
Hmm?
Trump able to just dilly dally do whatever the fuck he wants? He's
I'm sorry,
able.
that's not how that works. That's a law doesn't prevent somebody from committing a crime. It's there to define when they have committed the crime. The Constitution is just the law for our government, so it's there to define whenever they have committed the crime. It's not there to it should make them not want to commit the crime, but it doesn't stop it. That's not how that works. Just like how regular laws are.
What is your definition of the word meaningless? Go ahead and start.
I would say it would be lacking effective force, binding authority, or practical consequences as a restraint on a government power.
How do you define the word meaningless?
Well, purely in reference to the Constitution, I define meaningless as in it is completely absolved of its power. It has no actual use or practical use in this country and cannot be used to hold anybody accountable to their actions.
Marbury versus Madison in 1803. The Supreme Court asserted its judicial review, striking down a federal law without any express grant in the Constitution. The 10th Amendment reserves undelegated powers to the states or to people. Yet the court claimed this one for itself. That self-granted authority has gone effectively unchallenged for 223 years, no repudiation and no reversal. If the Constitution can't stop its own enforcers expanding beyond the text, it's meaningless as a limit. Kurt Gödel's loophole exposes a deeper flaw. The Constitution can theoretically legally permit its own transformation into a dictatorship. A document that can amend into tyranny isn't a safeguard, it's a suicide pact. Enumerated powers were meant to confine the federal government, yet the Commerce Clause, intended for interstate trade, has ballooned into Gibbons versus Ogden, McCullough, and Wickard v. Filburn to regulate private wheat grown on a farm. The necessary and proper clause became a blank check. Selective incorporation applies to some Bill of Rights protections to the states, but leaves others weak or unincorporated, protection on the court's whim. These aren't isolated glitches. The pattern is constraint, self-expansion, loopholes, selective enforcement, unchallenged overreach. The Constitution either authorizes power growth as we see, or proves it's powerless to prevent it. In either case, as Lysander Spooner said, it is unfit to exist as a meaningful restraint.
I don't know how he had the time to, and I am doing my time here. I don't know how he had the time to come up with any of these court cases and stuff. It's only been a day, but I will say that when it comes to the Constitution, just like any law or parameters that are set for just any civilian within any country, not just America, people will bend them. People that have bad intentions or even good intentions will find ways to bend what they mean for to suit their purpose. The idea that a document such as the Constitution, which is a living document, in cases where it has been bent or used in ways that are not considered to be the proper way that you interpret it, does not mean that it does not hold its purpose. If it is not being used properly and it is clearly in defiance of what the actions of the government is clearly in defiance of what the Constitution is actually saying, then they will face repercussions for it. That is the purpose of a document. And it is not to completely prevent exactly these actions. Just as a law isn't completely to prevent you from doing something, you absolutely have free will to do things that would go against the law. However, it is there to make sure, one, to hopefully instate in their mind that there will be repercussions so they won't do those things, but also so that you can do something after and make them face repercussions. That is the purpose of our Constitution and many other things that were not brought up in this discussion that I don't feel the list at the moment, but I think I basically got to the purpose that I wanted to state here. That's it.